All right, it's a little after 10 and numbers are holding steady here for a little bit. Bruce, you want to get things started?
Sure, let me unmute. Thanks everybody for being on board this morning. A couple of minutes after the fact, I know we're doing an interesting and unique medium. Can everyone hear me okay? And I know most of you are all muted, but can everybody hear me okay? Nod your heads, that works.
Yep.
Audio is good.
The Heil Pro headset is an amazing thing on an HP laptop, right? All right. We've got a lot of folks that are here. And Dave, you've probably got the presenter view that I'm not seeing, and that's okay. If we have any new folks that are joining us for the first time, can you do the raising of your hand or clapping of your hand thing? Oliver, welcome aboard. There's a familiar call sign. Thank you for being here with us. KA6DUH, Dennis as well, thank you for being here with us. Good morning. Anyone else?
Stephen?
Stephen, MIE on board as well. All right, folks. We've got a presentation for this morning, so we're not going to hold it very, very long. Tactically, I'll give you some information. I'll let Dave do the section announcements as there are any, and then I've got a couple of requests after that. Tactically, there is no change in our status here in San Diego as far as ARES goes. We are not being activated to any level, and we are not being activated for any specific functions. That does not mean that we should not all be doing regular things that you would expect us to do for preparedness. I would hope, especially when we are now getting weeks per gallon, if not days per gallon, out of our vehicles. I would hope that our vehicles have fuel. I would hope that we've got enough food for our families. We've got enough PPE-related gear that we are going to be able to go out and take care of ourselves in case we do need to go out. And I would also hope that if anybody needs something from a community perspective, whether it's a piece of radio gear, maybe an antenna, maybe odds and ends, things like that, that we're at least talking about.
You're fading in and out, Bruce.
Okay, I'm hoping that I'm not fading in and out. Am I fading in and out?
Yes, you are.
Interesting.
Yeah, but you're not right now.
Okay, not doing anything differently on my side, so maybe the connection is doing strange things. If at any point, keep sending messages if I'm having an issue. I was saying that I'm hoping that people have their PPE gear together. If people are doing things with their radios, they should be checking their gear out, making sure things are running as they should be. From a tactical perspective, as mentioned, there is nothing from an alert or activation level that ARES is currently doing. But having said that, my comment has always been regarding compounding events, which we hope that we will not have, which would include utility outages, things related to earthquakes, things related to other things that are coming, including a storm that's going to be starting sometime tomorrow. Very heavy, sometime Sunday, Monday through Tuesday, Wednesday, potentially, with even thunderstorms, as I'm understanding, and then rain throughout the week. Just kind of be aware of what's going to be happening around you. Of course, we had to go out and get a little shock to the system yesterday. I was actually up on the roof putting another dipole up because that's what I do to keep going or keep from going stir crazy. And my son said, well, I know you didn't fall on the roof, but what was that jolt I just felt? So other things are going on around us as well. As far as system related things from the utility perspective, I'm sure that a lot of you that are not being supplemented by solar are probably realizing that your daytime usage in your household may have gone up, and that's just going to be a fact of life. But I guess you could offset that by saying that you're not driving around and doing things in some cases. The power grid has had some interesting anomalies. Even though the buildings and the large businesses are generally and largely shut down, a lot of the things for those buildings, even though they have energy saving capabilities, doesn't reduce it down to a negligible footprint. And all of the folks that are working from home are stressing the system. So we are not at any kind of critical danger, but we're obviously, from the electrical grid perspective, from the electrical companies throughout California, trending very, very high and in a pattern that they not normally have seen. Same thing happens with internet access related to your actual home carrier. And as you might imagine as well, the patterns for cellular distribution have been disrupted a lot, not from the service degradation perspective in many cases, but you may see that your phone, instead of being LTE or 5G, may be reduced to some slower connection rate. And if you're streaming Netflix, I keep understanding that people throughout the country, including Southern California, are seeing their higher resolution pictures get downgraded. And my understanding is that you can click on magic buttons and make them go higher and go back up to what they should be. But a lot of folks are letting it trend downwards to go out and take the bullet for other folks and let the internet access be good. A lot of things are just at high thresholds is where I'm going. So we could have interruptions of service. That's totally possible. And we could have other things going on. So I would hope that everybody has a current copy downloaded of the comm plan. We all should have that. If you don't know where to go to get that, we can always help you. I would hope that, again, from a community perspective and what we're doing, that if anybody needs assistance, they can reach out, ask other folks, even if it's advice on how to use your radio or what to do. I know the WinLink stuff is still ongoing. We should be practicing and doing things like that. We should make sure our radios are really truly programmed to go out and work local repeaters. And also just be, as always, prepared to use simplex when necessary and when needed. So with that, I don't think there's probably anything else I can say as far as situational awareness goes. I will turn it over to Dave, let Dave go out and do section-related announcements. We'll go out and ask Rob, even though we're doing this vicariously, I'm sure, if there's any training or other training-related announcements. And we'll go through the regular routine, and I'll go out and ask the section. The ECs themselves, the emergency coordinators and the DVCs, a couple of
You went away again. I'm sorry.
Okay, am I back?
You're back.
All right, must be the stream, and I apologize for that. I'll start off with Dave. We'll do training and related topics with Rob, and then we'll come back, and I've got a couple of questions for the ECs and DVCs. Go ahead, Dave.
All right, just a couple things coming up here. Zoom has changed some of their formatting. One, they want everybody using a waiting room. So when you click on the link to log in, you're put into a waiting room and you have to be approved to be admitted to the meeting. So if you'd put your call signs up there when you check in, that would help Rob and I a lot as we're admitting people. Sometimes we just don't remember a code name or something that somebody has used. As far as on the air things, the 19th is the rookie roundup. And then next month on the 13th is the VHF contest. So, but a good time just to get on the air anyway. Just like Bruce said, to make sure your radios are working and to keep everything up to par. Field day is going to be interesting this year. There have been a lot of discussion going on whether people are just going to do it from home, whether clubs are going to be allowed to do it still as a club, even though they are not within the 100-yard circle or whatever it is. So it's going to be interesting to see how the rules go this year. So with that, we'll give it back to Bruce.
All right, very good. Thank you, Dave. And Rob, training related section, onboarding related announcements. I would expect that perhaps we've got some increased numbers. I've seen a lot of invites go out and welcome messages go out. Tell us about what we're doing section wise and onboarding.
Membership wise, in ARES, we're seeing a slow increase in numbers. People that have had stale memberships for a few years have all of a sudden become more interested and are joining. That's good. Last Thursday night on the ARES UHF net, the 060 machine performed well. That's very good. So speaking of nets, if anybody that is not in the net control rotation would like to try to their hand at maybe one net sometime being net control, let me know. Some of the people that are in the rotation may yield their position for a month to let you try your hand. We'll of course send out the roster and the script and all that to you so that you can practice being a net control, which is a very important thing about emergency communications. Everybody working up to the level where they can act as a net control during an emergency. And that's oh, and this morning I put out the link that you saw for the neighborhood evacuation team that we had that presentation by OES last September or last last Saturday, and so that's was put out by email in the Reflector. If anybody's not in the email Reflector groups .io, let me know. We'll try to work them in there. There's still some people migrating over from the Yahoo group. That's all I have. Thank you. K6RJF.
Very professionally done. Thank you. Okay, a couple of quick things before we get to the presentation. First of all, I had mentioned on the Thursday evening get-together that there was a specific program update for Mac and for Windows users for Zoom. If you haven't already done that update or been prompted to do that and you're using the installed application rather than the pure web-based version, I would strongly encourage that you go out and do the upgrade. Secondarily, I would expect that everybody probably knows, and you can just nod your heads because I can see at least a good chunk of you. I expect everybody knows about the new PPE suggestions that have come down. If you are working in essential business, you are at this point supposed to be provided, I would certainly hope, by your employer and not personally required to do so. You should be issued an N95 or equivalent mask. That's part of the requirement if you're working in essential business. So everybody was joking earlier about seeing folks running around in masks in weird places. I haven't personally been out to a drive-through. I haven't personally been out to a fast food restaurant, but I would just imagine it's going to be very interesting seeing people wearing their N95s. And that's kind of an interesting deal because they're saying that that's the requirement now. And they're not backing off on that. If you happen to be working in an office building like I am, where it's non-clinical, they've relaxed that a little bit and they've allowed us to go out and wear cloth bandanas and masks and whatever we happen to come up with as long as it's facial protection. So I can just imagine how interesting it's going to be when I go into the office to visit, looking like the Frito Bandito.
Bruce, can I interrupt? This is Ed, W3AED.
Go ahead, sir.
I'm confused by that because I didn't see anything that required people in critical jobs to have to wear N95s. I thought it was just a type of cloth covering. I heard that from Faulkner yesterday, from what I read this morning. So if you've got something that requires use of N95 for critical workers like grocery store workers, could you let me know where you found that?
Okay, and I don't think I interpreted it wrong, but it's entirely possible. I thought that the specification was that if you were exposed to the public and essential, it was supposed to be a 95.
No, I think that they asked specifically that you don't order N95s because they're for healthcare workers. So cloth is fine.
Okay.
But I think Faulkner said several times, don't go out and buy N95s. But if anybody wants to know how to make one, I can tell you that, or send it to Bruce and you can forward it.
Okay, very good. Sorry about that. If I had misinformation, I apologize. I may have been reading a different stream that had some different info in it, but I thought it was N95.
Hey, Bruce,
Yes, sir.
I have a comment about the N95. If you do have an N95 and you have one with a check valve, it's no good. Plug it up because you breathe out of that thing and it's supposed to protect other people more so than ourselves. That's a useless mask unless you plug it up. I plugged mine up with our TV.
I laughed about that because I see those in public very frequently, and yes, that was my first thought, was that it helps you on the way in, but if you're coughing, that doesn't help me on the way out. Okay, so we covered that. I had asked last Saturday for the ECs and the DECs to reach out and effectively touch base with the folks that they represent in their areas and the volunteers that are represented in their areas. And I was, as I called it, not trying to give folks busy work, but I wanted to make sure that from a local, regional, functional perspective that people were okay. People were okay as volunteers. People were okay as communicators. If people had specific needs that we could help out with from the radio community perspective, that maybe we had at least the opportunity to go out and try to do that. And I've only seen one or two folks really respond with information showing what they had done and reflecting input that they had had. So what I want to ask at this point is for the ECs and the DECs, if you've got any information or updates for your specific areas, anything that tactically we should be aware of, this would be the right time to go out and share with the group. Maybe we can get some ideas. Maybe we can just go out and make sure that everybody's okay. And we can start anywhere.
Bruce, it's Bob. I put that email together the very next morning and tried to send it out, and I had like 15 email addresses batched together in my to list, and the email wouldn't go. And Fred and I exchanged a couple of emails back and forth, and it's probable that one of those email addresses must be corrupted because Cox wasn't sending it out. So I'm going to have to go back through and send those emails one by one by one by one.
Interesting. I wouldn't have expected that they would have stopped the entire batch if you had one that was bad, but okay, interesting. Dennis, were you gonna?
Try 'em in batches. That'll save you some time and find out which one's bad.
Anyone else? EC, DEC?
Yeah, this is Dennis, if I may.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, I did send out a group email to probably, again, about 15 folks in the immediate area, and got a handful of replies that most folks were working on taking the FEMA courses, working to upgrade their radios and make sure that everything was working properly. Didn't have any specific requests for assistance out of that group.
Very good, thank you. And Curtis, K6I BP. You had your hand raised.
Yes, I sent email out at Fred's request. I only have 3 people out here in IB that are part of ARES, and 2 of them generally get deployed. So I did not hear back from anybody, but I did see John, NB6P, and he is deployed. So I know he got my email. I haven't heard from anybody though.
All right, very good, thank you. And Gary, thank you for your efforts on this as well. I saw your emails go out. W5WYQ, go ahead.
Yeah, I sent a round of broadcast email last Saturday. I had a trickle of replies in. I had some bounces as well. There was no needs. Of the handful that replied, everything seems to be fine.
Okay, very good. Anyone else EC, DEC wise?
I have something, Bruce.
I didn't see a raised hand, but go ahead.
Sorry, I'm still figuring the hand raise thing. This is
No worries,
Jay.
go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, this is Jay from Imperial County. And we continue to be engaged with the EOC here in Imperial County, along with the Salvation Army, not physically, but electronically. We're planning our monthly meeting on this coming Tuesday via Zoom. So I'll send out an invitation if folks want to participate in that. And other than that, we've had a lot of interest, like Rob said, from folks who have been inactive for a while, which is good. And I've gotten a lot of questions about studying for licensing, which I'm glad to field. Encouraging people who are thinking they're ready to test to maybe study for their general as well. And just checking on everyone. So far, we don't have any needs from our rank and file members, but we'll check again during this monthly meeting. That's all I have. KM6.
Very good, thanks, Jay. Anyone else? I've got some participants that have raised their hands. Hang on a second. Let's find out who you are. Dun, 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 dun. And I apologize because it popped up and said 3 people, but it didn't say which 3 people.
I think Gary's been up the longest.
Gary, go ahead.
This is Gary. I am just learning this Zoom, and I did not put my hand up intentionally. So
Okay, fair enough. You. All right. Really quick, and I guess that was one. Was there anyone else with a raised hand that I'm not seeing?
Ron, KG6HSQ.
HSQ, go ahead, please.
Did not participate in last meeting, but here in Fallbrook, monitoring the repeater for any needs and any updates. And we're normally have our club meeting today, so we're going to try Zoom for that.
Very good. Anyone else?
The other hands that are up right now are Whiskey 5, Whiskey Yankee Quebec, and AF6 GM.
Let's go with Jay first. No disrespect. Jay, go ahead.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Just a quick note, if for all those you might not have heard, we have postponed our May 2 tech class, and we're going to have to kind of see what happens with the extra. That'll probably get pushed as well. I'm kind of waiting back to hear from the host to see if they have opinions or constraints. Given that they're military, I'm thinking they're probably going to have restrictions for access on the base. So we'll see what happens. That might end up being pushed to after June. FYI.
Roger that. Thank you. And WYQ again. Gary. One more time for W5 WYQ. I still show
I'm sorry, I had another thing come in. What's the question for me, sir?
You still had a hand raised. I wanted to make sure we had covered your issues or your hand raising.
My issues are impossible. My hand raise was a reply to the email status, so we're covered. I'll drop my hand. Thank you.
No worries. All right, as David mentioned earlier, very helpful if when you get into the system, if you could either rename your screen name so we've got at least a name plus a call sign, that would be super helpful. Also helps with the waiting room aspects, as David mentioned. So as we are tinkering with this, I know we'll get better. And I know for some of the folks that are joining from the mobile devices, iPads and Android devices, that's something that also probably needs to be done manually. I don't know that you can actually store it there, so it's just something to check. All right. Emergency and disaster communications, and just by nodding of the heads, we'll look for some feedback from the audience. Does anybody have any interest in doing, other than the Sunday, but maybe doing, now that some of us have a little bit more spare time or we have more time at home, working from home, etc.? Is there any interest in doing maybe a midweek HF related net as opposed to just Sunday morning? I see Jay nodding his head. I see Dennis giving a thumbs up. All right. I will talk to Rob and Dave about that. I'm thinking middle of the week maybe. I know we've got the EC related nets on Thursday, but maybe a Wednesday night perhaps, or maybe a Wednesday afternoon. We'll sort that out, figure out how that goes, and that way it'll give us some time on our HF gear to go out and play with different things and antennas, etc. As far as VHF stuff and VHF related comms go, I want to share with you that the January VHF contest, as it was called, and what we normally use is kind of a simplex, if you will, mapping exercise, as well as a simplex comms check, finding out how our gear plays and what we can do with our gear, etc. Very successful, as it turns out. There were initial write-ups in the QST. There's actually a preliminary article that's been written. It's only a one-pager. There'll be a lot more details coming out, and there'll be a fairly big in-depth article, as I understand in the June edition of QST. So if you get that in print or get that online, there will be lots of details and info there, but it sounded very much like a lot of folks were on the air using handheld, portable, and mobile gear, which was good. And there was a tremendous uptick in folks that were participating either for the first time or just in general. Almost 1,000 logs for the January event, which is kind of hard to believe. We weren't really in the COVID situation, if you want to call it that, back in January that we were at least aware of. And there was just a huge, huge drive from a participation perspective for a January event. And I think Southern California did exceptionally well. I'll kind of leave it at that, but we did fabulously on this. It was really an amazing thing to see the numbers and see all the folks that did participate. So maybe while we've got some time as well, we'll talk about in advance of the June event doing effectively maybe a VHF event again, privately outside the normal corridors of what we call the contest window. And again, because some of us have more time at home, more availability at home, we can get on the air during different times of the day and just generally check things out. Particularly interested again in the simplex comms perspective, band by band, what we can do and who we can talk to in our area, just in case some of the commercial stuff and some of the hilltops decide they want to go dark because we have an event. There was a comment related to HF, and that was from the midweek event, something other than 75 meters. I totally agree. I think we should probably figure out some time window where we perhaps slot some time, maybe even an hour, and go through the bands. Let's go through it, 75, 80 meters, go up to 10 meters. Let's find out what's able to be done locally. 6 meter simplex, as an example. I've done stuff between here in Orange County, here in LA, all the way up the coast. That's generally for me not an issue just because of my location. And I've talked about this, and a lot of chuckles come along with it. But when we do the Sunday morning net on the 1.5 machine from Sandra, I can work Craig in Campo simplex better than I come through the repeater out there, and he can hear me better on the input of the machine than he can on the output. So we should just probably think about ringing that out and just, again, having a good finger on the pulse. I'm seeing a message. If you guys are not looking at your chat window, there is a chat window that's available, and you can send messages there, both privately and openly to the group. And there was a message in there indicating that someone needs an HF antenna. So for KG6 VVN, maybe if you could send a message to the group what it is that you're trying to accomplish or do. Maybe someone's got something laying around in their garage or something that's no longer in use or surplus. Maybe someone that's on this morning can help you. So looks like
There's
Jay.
one hand up from NUI.
I saw NUI that just raised his hand. I was going to say, Jay, I see that you got your hand raised. Thanks for the prompt, Rob. Go ahead, Jay.
Yes, sir. I figured that out. And I did want to mention, as just a general bit of awareness as to how interest in the hobby is growing. I'm part of a ham radio Facebook group, which I think probably a lot of you are as well. And the admin noted last week that he was getting new applications for membership in that group at a rate of 50 to 100 per hour. So we may want to, well, we should all be keeping our ears open for our neighbors or folks we're working with, because I've been approached quite a bit about interest in the hobby in general. And just like Bruce always says, need to have an answer for those folks as to what to do next.
Totally agree. My neighbors have sort of a running joke. They don't always like the array of aluminum in my backyard that you can see if you look up as you're walking by the house. But their joke is always that when the power goes out and when storms really happen and things get really weird, they are always the first ones that know exactly what door to knock on and bring cookies to and say, hey, we just wanted to stop by and say hello and bring you a treat. And by the way, what's going on in the world around me that I should know about? It's always kind of an interesting place to be. Dave, any closing comments? If not, I'll let you go out and pass it over and we'll start our presentation.
But first, a question for Bruce about the January VHF contest.
Go ahead, Rob.
Were there in San Diego any records set by anybody during the January VHF contest?
You're killing me, Smalls. You're killing me. Rob did that on purpose in case you didn't know that. And Dave is laughing in the background. I can see him laughing. The January VHF contest is always one of those interesting events where I claim, or at least I like to claim, that out of all of the VHF events, this is the one in particular where the West Coast might normally be in a more favorable place to either score better, do better, have more contacts, etc. Because usually in January, the northeastern United States, which is usually the dominant player in all events that are VHF throughout the year, might be snowed in, rained in, iced in, combination thereof, antennas are broken, you name it. Anything possible could happen. And generally speaking, the West Coast does fare a little bit better in those areas because they have a higher population density and they certainly have far, far more people that are on the air. The record score nationally, not just divisionally or locally in Southern California, but the high score nationally for the FM category had previously always been held by someone in the northeastern United States. And in 2018, that score moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. So the West Coast had that high score starting in 2018 by quite a bit. It was like a score difference. I believe their previous high scores on the East Coast for FM were 6,000 and change. And we ended up, I think, with a little over 8,000 points. So you can do whatever numbers you want to figure, 25% increase over what their highest ever had been. So since 2018, the West Coast has owned that score. And in 2020, which was this year, the West Coast once again broke that score again, and the West Coast still has that score. So for 2018, 2019, 2020, West Coast owns the FM category, and a lot of that has to do with the participation of all the folks that were on the air throughout Southern California. So you guys all did a fabulous job in contributing to that, as well as the participants that were on board.
Bruce, who
Anything else
was that
before we
that
kick it
had
off?
those?
I'm not sure what you're asking, Rob.
Anybody in ARES or anybody in San Diego we know
Being
that had those
intention.
high scores?
Yeah. These guys are ribbing me. For those that are on the meeting, I'm having rocks thrown at me. So in 2018, I was the one that broke the East Coast score for the very first time and took it back to the West Coast. That was the 8,000 and change score, and nobody defeated that score in 2019. And the QST preliminary article that came out for 2020 simply indicated that a new national record was set for the FM category by myself at 11,000 points and change. And the preliminary article didn't refer back to the fact that this new national score that was just broken or just achieved was me breaking my own score from 2018, which would be an interesting reconciliation when they come out with the actual results in the June edition. So thank you all for your help. And Rob, damn it, knock it off. Other than that, back to Dave, and we'll get started with the presentation.
All right, thanks. I think Rob did that very well. Thought he did a good job of sliding that in there. Dennis, you're up with a presentation on FirstNet.
Very good. Thank you, Dave. This will be my first time trying this out, so y'all cut me a little bit of slack as I try and figure out how to make all this happen. So stand by, if you will. Okay, Dave, can you see a full screen of the slides? I'm sorry?
Yes, we can. My mute wasn't working. Yes, we can. It's a full screen.
Very good then. All right, well, let's get started then. I'm going to be talking about something that I got a nice lead in from Bruce on, which is called FirstNet. As Bruce described, cell networks can go down. They have capacity issues. But in parallel with the overall issue of having a variety of communications, there is a new system that is being put in place called FirstNet. And let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the First Responder Broadband Network. Okay, well, what is there to talk about on the subject? Well, it's an alternate form of cell phone coverage funded by the federal government and intended to be adopted nationwide over the next few years. In short, a couple words about myself for those who haven't met me. I'm the EC for the metropolitan San Diego area. As you can see on the screen, I've gone from tech to extra. I retired about 5 years ago as a former export licensing manager, security manager, contract manager for a local major defense contractor. And I'm originally from Connecticut, but I've lived here in Serra Mesa since 1975. I do have to put in a disclaimer that I'm not expressly or implicitly endorsing AT&T or their associated vendors. This presentation about FirstNet is quite heavy on the participation of AT&T, so I just thought I'd have to put that disclaimer in here. Okay, so here's the list of topics that we're going to go through. Introductions, what is FirstNet? Why does it exist? Who owns it, builds it, manages it, so on and so on, including what some of the devices are that are in FirstNet. Well, first of all, FirstNet is a first responder exclusive broadband cell network. And the whole point is to have interoperability across the nation, including all states and territories. As mentioned here in the first bullet, all 50 states, the 5 US territories, plus Washington, DC have accepted this FirstNet concept and its execution as a means to obtain universal communications interoperability. Again, it's funded by the US government. The funding is coming from Spectrum auction funds. So that's certainly an area where we might have some concern as Spectrum is auctioned off and to support things like this, but creeps into some of our ham radio areas. The authority to proceed was established in 2012 in the Middle Class Tax Relief Act. One of the things that was thrown in there. And ultimately, it's coming as a result of the 9/11 Commission's findings regarding interoperability failures. They finally got around in March of 2017 to award the contract to AT&T at $6.5 billion for the first 5 years, with extensions allowing it to go up to 25 years and somewhere near $100 billion overall. So the question is, what is FirstNet right now? It's currently a 4G LTE cell network using first responder dedicated frequency bands and a separate backbone structure. That's all separate frequency bands in addition to commercial frequency bands and a separate backbone infrastructure just for FirstNet. Certainly, a fundamental goal of FirstNet is to allow collaboration between first responder agencies and using a multimedia communications that provides for data as well as voice communications. It's specifically designed to provide fire, police, EMS, EOC, and other supporting agencies like public works, hospitals, and public health, important right now, with a common means to share voice, video, photos with each other. Again, it uses allocated and dedicated cell frequency bands to provide sufficient bandwidth to communicate incident voice and data. By law, FirstNet is mandated to be built out in rural and tribal areas in parallel with urban areas. So the rural areas are not only getting their share of spectrum use in parallel with urban areas, but in some cases ahead of that in urban areas due to current lack of cell coverage. Okay, this is a slide showing where the dedicated frequencies are. As you can see here, it's called band class 14, and it consists of 2 larger sections and two sections within those. As you can see here, they're identified as FirstNet. We've got part of the spectrum that runs from 758 to 768, and then from 788 and up to 798. The what's labeled the D band, which is that section from 758 to 763, and from 788 to 793, has no commercial use whatsoever. It is strictly available for first responders using the FirstNet network. The parallel public safety bands as shown, public safety broadband and narrowband, those are currently in use by local areas, particularly the narrowband, which is the land mobile radio systems. So First Responder Network is an independent authority within the Department of Commerce. And as I've already mentioned, it's specifically designed and built to support first responders across the nation. And they have a board. The board has a cross-section of representatives from public safety, various technical aspects, Department of Commerce, Department of Homeland Security, Attorney Generals, and the Office of Management and Budget. So there are representatives from fire service, law enforcement, and public health on that board. As I mentioned earlier, AT&T got a contract worth a duration of 25 years, and they were funded for the first 5 years at $6.5 billion. When they were awarded the contract, they not only took the responsibility to build up a network specifically for the first responders using first responders allocated spectrum, but they also dedicated their commercial spectrum for use in the system as well. And any first responder that might be using their phone in the commercial frequencies would actually preempt any normal commercial traffic that we might have. So it was quite an augmentation to the overall spectrum to have both the dedicated public safety frequencies as well as the commercial frequencies, so that AT&T could roll out this overall system in a very quick manner. So again, as mentioned there in the next to the last bullet, there's more broadband spectrum almost everywhere. And right now that network build out is in full development and in the installation mode. You'll see from this slide that they've reached some significant numbers. They've got 10,000 different public service agencies subscribed to this. They have over 100 FirstNet ready devices such as cell phones and wireless routers and that sort of thing to allow the system to be used across the country. They were, as of a little while ago, 75% in incorporating that band 14, that public safety allocated band across the country. So they've made great strides in making all of that happen and making the connections of various agencies and other devices. So as you might gather from what I've been discussing, public safety does get a dedicated fast lane for secure communications. There are specialized features that are not in your commercial wireless networks: priority access, preemption, greater capacity, and built-in resilience and hardened connections. And I'll get into some of the other options a little further down the road. So in addition to creating the infrastructure for all of this to happen, the FirstNet organization has been working with a variety of wireless device suppliers to come up with telephones that work specifically in the public safety frequencies and provide the ability to have high capacity data transfer possibilities. So again, as a result, this dedicated bandwidth allows to have heavy data throughput that would otherwise choke up on commercial networks. A good example of that is FirstNet users can live stream video from one police officer to another, or from one fire scene section to another part of the fire scene, so that data can be shared in real time, both amongst people at the scene of a disaster or incident of some sort, as well as up the chain to supervisors, or across the chain to dispatchers and other folks. As mentioned in this last bullet, it's designed such that if there's a fireman at the scene of a disaster and they need to have an idea of what's going on inside the building, building floor plans can be downloaded to their tablet or cell phone or other device, so that they know ahead of time what's going, where they can go inside the building to look for survivors and that sort of thing. So situational awareness is a big deal. So who has access to it? What are the restrictions? As listed here on the screen, we've got fire departments, police departments, EMS, EOCs, public works agencies, public health agencies, and extended support agencies for the above. There are two primary categories of authorized users: primary and extended primary. Primary users are those public safety entities that support first responders, such as law enforcement, fire protection, EMS, call dispatching on 911, and emergency management. There is a document that's about 30 pages long that AT&T puts out, which identifies who's eligible to have access to the FirstNet network. As identified here, active sworn law enforcement officers, folks in the continuity of government chain, city and municipal mayors, municipal managers, tribal leaderships for recognized tribes, and military organizations such as the National Guard. Other primary users are listed here. I think most importantly for what's going on right now, as you can see in the last set of bullets, general medical and surgical hospitals, trauma centers, freestanding clinics, freestanding ambulatory and medical centers. So it's quite extensive as to the range of people that are eligible to participate. But in addition to those, there are a lot of folks that support those primary users, and those people include transportation, airline, ground, emergency broadcasting, healthcare, energy, for instance, SDG&E, information technology workers and support, the water supply sectors, and several others. So there's a pretty wide variety of folks that are eligible to get the phones and participate in the network. So based on all of that, we'll talk a little bit about this unique part of the spectrum that I mentioned earlier called band 14. It's a slice of the 700 megahertz phone spectrum allocated for public safety use exclusively, and it has an uplink and a downlink portion that will be utilized in the FirstNet operation, and it's currently currently in use. One of the nice things about this band 14 being public safety exclusive is that AT&T is allowed to use a higher transmitter power out of the cell service compared to the commercial ones, so that they can get a wider coverage area and better urban connectivity, particularly inside the buildings. Here's that chart once again, which shows you where this spectrum is located. And as you can see, it's at this time not up in the gigahertz areas. It's strictly down in the areas where we understand most commercial cell and 4G, 5G is expected to be for the near time. So where can this FirstNet also expand to support the communities? And again, right now with this virus thing, and I wrote this a long time ago before we got into the situation we're at, it can be used for telehealth. For example, in Alpine County, there's 1,100 residents in Alpine County of California, but the only ambulance service comes out of Nevada. So during that transit time that the ambulance takes to get from Nevada to someplace in Alpine County, they can use this broadband network to provide medical telemetry, for example, and provide communications between the hospital and the ambulance, or the patient and the ambulance, to bring everybody up to speed and make sure that the proper activity is being accomplished once they get to the victim or patient. And as mentioned there in the middle bullet, they can actually do medical imaging and send data from devices like EKGs from the victim's location back to the hospital for triage and that sort of thing. Encryption is a big deal. That's coming for public safety communications, and that will be integrated eventually. I'm not quite sure if that has come into play yet. I didn't run across that in my reading. Another important thing is that this whole network has to be integrated into 911 call and dispatch centers. And that takes some doing, and that's in progress. One of the things that's probably pretty important is that they expect to get to using 5G on the commercial side. But at this point in time, the majority of the protocols and the setup and the phones are still in the 4G LTE arena. And so it's going to take a while for all this eventually to flow into the 5G networking area, which typically means the gigahertz frequencies. Here's a slide that shows where those frequencies and bands are. It's a bit busy, but it does give you some idea of where these things are. As you can see, we're here in the 700 megahertz band at this point, but there's plenty of opportunities to get up into the gigahertz range for the 5G. This slide is pretty much self-explanatory. It explains the evolution of cell service and broadbanding, and AT&T has in fact rolled out 5G service, although at this point they're still I guess it's more of a marketing tool than it is any real specific advantage, because they're still using the megahertz bands rather than the gigahertz bands. So as I was leading into, I guess, when this FirstNet starts to accomplish integration into the 5G, there's a whole variety of policies, procedures, and standards that have to be negotiated for operational use. For example, firefighters, they have an extreme interest in knowing not only in the X and Y axis where a downed firefighter might be or a victim might be, but they also need to know what the Z axis is if for a multi-floor building. And so one of the things that has to be negotiated is how precise does the builder of a cell phone type device that's used in FirstNet how precise do they have to be in knowing what the elevation or the altitude is, so that firefighters could find the correct floor within a building. Other rollout issues are right now neighborhood non-compliance or community groups that are fighting back over the placement of multiple cell towers in their neighborhoods, as well as some of the hysteria that goes along with RF exposure. So all those things have to be dealt with. And let's see. I think I've already touched on this. AT&T is moving forward to try to get to the gigahertz range, but they're still working on the lower ranges. And let's see. Okay, what's currently missing from this FirstNet rollout? Big part of the problem right now is that many large metropolitan areas, such as San Diego, have robust, very expensive, very extensive LMR radio networks. For those of us who were in the San Diego 6 shooters, we had a presentation by the manager of San Diego County's radio system, and he was explaining how much money was being spent to upgrade the overall system that runs from the Pacific Ocean all the way out to the Salton Sea, and for both the Imperial and San Diego counties and many of, if not most of the first responder type organizations. So there's a lot of integration solutions that need to be created in order to be able to talk between the cell-based system and the more typical radio-based systems, trunked radio systems. Right now, there are some manufacturers of these broadband broadband first responder cell phones that are coming out with a push-to-talk solution, so that it's not just one individual to another individual. They can do more broadcast sorts of things. They have overall an interest in and a requirement to complete building out the band 14 access across the country. And again, this rollout to 5G is not planned for the near term. That's going to take some while for a variety of policies and procedures to be identified. So with this rollout by AT&T as the exclusive contractor, who might be unhappy? Well, the competitors Verizon and T-Mobile have pushed back strongly because they're not funded by the federal government to roll out this system. And Verizon in particular had a very large chunk of the public service cell phone contracts. And so this is taking away a lot of their bread and butter. In fact, I believe the city of San Diego is a Verizon customer. As I mentioned in a previous slide, San Diego County is rolling out its next generation of 700 megahertz trunked radios, and they're not necessarily interested in junking that or stopping to take on a whole different system than what the feds are funding and pushing. And let's see. There are certainly a lot of jurisdictions who would like to have actual 5G capability, but that's again some way off. So here are some of the operating devices: cell phones, tablets, laptops. They've all been produced or designed and produced in cooperation with the FirstNet operating activities. They also have created hotspots, wireless routers that can be used both mobily as well as in fixed locations. And probably the neatest toys, if you will, is that AT&T has come up with about 72, as of the last count, what they call deployables. There on the left side of the screen, you see a UAV that can be sent up over disaster areas such as a tornado-stricken area. In the center, they've got what they call a Colt, which is a cell-on-light truck mobile operation. And then over on the right, you've got the cows, the cell-on wheels, primarily trailers that can be brought to major events such as the Miramar Air Show, or in fact, we saw these kind of mobile cell towers up in Idaho when my wife and I were up there to see the solar eclipse, and they were expecting to have hundreds of thousands of people crowding the area. Anyway, these are available for specific use at disaster areas. And they've even gone so far to create a blimp, FirstNet 1. And this blimp can be, again, brought to a disaster area. And as you can read here on the screen, it's a good size, a 55 foot, and it can stay up there for about 2 weeks, providing relay opportunities for the users on the ground. And as it says there in the last bullet, they have a 14-hour window to get these deployable cell devices to a disaster area. So does any of this mean much for us hams? Well, probably not. But on the flip side, usually the public safety folks are not providing communications to organizations like the Red Cross for shelters. Some of us volunteer organizations take care of that. Certainly FirstNet is still a cell-based system, and it's going to have the same vulnerabilities as a cell-based system, although AT&T is building in reliability features to reduce that vulnerability. So when the cell goes down, your FirstNet user might not have any communications. And certainly in the case of a disaster, it's going to take a while for AT&T to get their deployables to the disaster area. As mentioned, cell phone systems can suffer outages. They don't necessarily all have generators, and certainly there's no such thing as 100% reliability. So there will always be a case for us as amateur radio operators to support and supplement first responders as well. And of course, there might be cyber issues as we're hearing about with Zoom. So that pretty much concludes the presentation. For anyone who wants to know more about FirstNet, there are some websites that are listed, and I'll pass these off to Rob and Dave to put on the website if anybody has an interest. And that should be it. Any questions?
And it does look like we've got a couple of raised hands. Dave, you want to moderate?
I've lost my screen here for a minute. I'm not sure what's going on.
Oh, you need to take your presentation back. And I'm looking at Yahoo Mail, if that helps you, Dave. So you may have toggled your screen, but now I'm looking at your desktop.
That's Dennis. That's Dennis's. Dennis, you need to go up to the top and close it. There we go. There we go. All right, Gary, I see yours is up first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just indicating that the screen was back and the audio's good. No question at this time.
All right, anybody have questions for Dennis?
I tried raising my hand. Am I in?
Go ahead.
From what you're saying, in a disaster, this is a cell-based system that will still go down, and they have to bring in equipment to cover up for it to fill in. So how's it any better in that sense than a current cell system and communication system that goes down anyway?
Okay, well, in that regard, it still has the vulnerabilities of an existing cell-based system, but I probably should reinforce the idea that a major part of its existence is to provide interoperability between organizations at the scene of a disaster. If they're all on this FirstNet network, then they can talk to each other, exchange data. As I mentioned, send a video from one spot to another at the scene of a disaster. If there are issues with physical destruction of cell towers, then yes, you're correct. It doesn't help a whole lot, but there are, as mentioned, specific disaster replacements, the deployables that I mentioned, that can be brought in on fairly short notice to take care of that.
Yeah, I'm done.
I can add a comment to that question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the commercial network was built under a set of financial constraints and design constraints that the FirstNet network has more flexibility with, bigger budget, higher design performance specifications. And so, for example, in the case of auxiliary power equipment, FirstNet will likely have base stations that are fully equipped with redundant power, local generator power, whereas commercial cell phone networks did not, and even today may not. Also, one of the significant events that happens during a disaster is network congestion. It's always been a big issue with the first responders that their belief and the priority of their messages is not well respected by the commercial networks, even though there is a priority system available to them. And so by having the FirstNet network dedicated to first responders, although it looks as though to me from the slides, the range of users has creeped considerably, the demand on the network is not going to be anywhere near as much as what can occur in the commercial network when all of us grab our cell phones and try and call our families. So that is going to be a mitigating factor in the case of a natural disaster communications, as well as the fact that they'll probably be overbuilding, that is having a larger margin of idle capacity in normal times, sitting and ready for use when a natural disaster event takes place. So certainly it's going to be susceptible to the same commercial power supply issues, but they're going to mitigate that by more robust construction, and by having the exclusive use, they're not going to be subject to the same demands of a commercial network and the congestion that will bring. So there's a couple of things. They'll still be using wireline or fiber optic networks to go between switching centers and base stations, and those will still be subject to infrastructure damage. Of course, base station damage should towers fall over and that sort of thing. But that's where the cell on trailers, cell on wheels, aerial vehicles, and so on kick in. End of comment.
Thank you very much. That was a very good expansion of in answer to the question. Thank you.
Well, on my side, and I see that we've got a raised hand. We'll take the raised hand first. KA6DUH, Dennis, please.
Yeah, that was Dennis that just made the comment. So I've cleared my hand.
Making sure we're good. You know, this is interesting. We saw, actually, I've seen the presentation 2 different times directly from AT&T, and they were approximately 7 months apart from each other. And the presentations were both dynamically different, probably from a delta of 30 to 40% of the material. And the same questions were asked by 2 different organizations that saw the presentation, and the AT&T answers were interesting. So I think this is still very much a work in progress, but one of the interesting dynamics of 5G, shy of folks in Europe setting towers ablaze, in case you haven't seen that news lately, One of the interesting dynamics of the 5G stuff is that while they are building out infrastructure in some areas and they're hanging the devices from poles, in some cases, what even appears to be very haphazardly, because you see the cables and other pieces of the antenna arrays in various areas hanging like it was like a test thing or something that they were checking out. And in some cases, they might be. The 5G stuff is very interesting, but it's also interesting from the perspective that it's very resource or utility related. If the power to the light pole that the 5G stuff is hanging on in the neighborhood that it's in, it goes down, then the question some folks had for some of the 5G things, not necessarily the FirstNet, but the 5G related items are, what happens to my 5G? So we'll be looking interestedly in what happens then, because if there's a large area that goes out and they had a dependency on 5G, does that mean that your device, your service, your tablet, whatever was enabled for that, drops down to regular LTE 4, 3, 2, whatever it happens to be? More information in the future, I'm sure, because that's going to be an interesting dynamic at play. Anything else for Dennis question-wise, or any other comments or feedback for Dennis question-wise?
John?
Yeah, there is a question for you on the chat side.
Okay, stand by. The question is, does the now under construction Elon Musk satellite blanket fit into these communications, maybe as a backup? I believe the answer to that would be no, there's not a connection. It's strictly AT&T constructed and operated, and doesn't have any connection to that. Anything else? Hearing none, I guess I'm all set. Thank you very much for listening.
Very good. Thank you, Dennis. For those that might or might not know sign language, or from the deaf or hard of hearing community, this is where you would go out and put your hands up and wave your hands back and forth and thank you. Dennis, that's your applause. There you go. Any of those things are appropriate. All right, so I don't have any closing comments for the group. Again, I would look very carefully at the weather forecast coming up, kind of keep an eye on what's going on. The current weather track is that we could potentially be wet almost all of next week through Saturday of next week. And I guess, again, the forecast numbers seem to be that, at least along the coastal areas, probably up to 3/4 or maybe even an inch of rain in areas. We got thunderstorm warnings and things related to that, which means winds and other things that could happen. Other radio related stuff. We lost our February, well, we lost our March meeting in our bubble on that. The goal was to have at least had the parking lot swap meet event going on to potentially move some of the donated and related estate items to ARES folks that were interested. I know it's kind of an odd time with the employment situation being what it is and a lot of folks not working, but if you are looking for anything specifically from the perspective of radio gear, we should probably figure out some way to go out and communicate that, maybe on the google.io site. And I've got a list specifically of Art's estate gear that we had talked about. Effectively, we've got a mobile setup that's a complete setup. We have an HF digital setup that was set up with a TNC for WinLink. We've got another HF setup that was configured for a Signal Link interface. So effectively, he had 3 different operational, units, if you will, that were in play when he passed away unexpectedly. So we've got turnkey gear that we know works. We've got some of his equipment plus some of the other donated gear that's available. And I'll see what I can do about getting Rob a list, and maybe we can just post it on the Google's group and see if we can go out and get some interest in that. The estate gear from Art in particular was a returning the money back to the family event. ARES is not taking any of the money for any of that equipment. Anything that comes in for his gear will specifically be going back to the family to help offset some of their unexpected costs, as you might imagine. I don't have anything else. Dave, Rob?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Breaking up, Dave.
There. What are the feelings on doing this every Saturday, along with Thursday night, or just Saturdays? Get some ideas from what people think. I'm open to either twice a week, or just on Saturdays, or every other Saturday, or whatever, just to keep in touch, especially with everything going on.
I vote for every other Saturday.
I agree.
I'd
I
go
also
with
vote
it.
for every other Saturday.
N1TEN as well.
This would be a good time to use the voting capability of this software program.
How about second and fourth Saturdays? Because there's some months have an odd number of Saturdays.
Yeah, I think that would track with my preference as well, as we stay with what would normally have been the regular scheduled day, since most folks that might be participating in other groups and other volunteer organizations and things like that have that reserved and put away, and in case they can make the opposing one as well, which would be the 4th, that would be fabulous. If we need to put it to a vote, folks, we can do that. I'll let Dave run that particular venue.
I think second and fourth is good, certainly through this period. When we get back to normality and in-person meetings, maybe we won't need to do this as much.
And I would consider probably the following. Let's keep with the thought process that the second Saturday is still our regular meeting day. The 4th, if we're going to do it on the following 2-week schedule, I would consider that to be more of an optional as opposed to really try to be there, if that makes sense.
So
yeah,
if
this is Bob. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
I was going to say, if that's the case, then we'll have a meeting next Saturday and then skip a week. So the next one would be on the 11th.
Hey, Dave, why don't you put it to a vote using the voting function?
All right, let's do that. Every other week, starting with the 11th. All in favor, click your yes button.
So you need to tell people where their yes button is.
Didn't even think of that. If you go to participants at the bottom, there's a yes or no button. So far we have 15 yeses and 17, 20. I think it's going to be every other week, starting on the 11th. So we will have a meeting on the 11th and then go from there and see what people want to do.
All right, very good. Let's also talk a little bit more about the HF side. We talked about having maybe a midweek HF net. Is Wednesday maybe, I don't know, tell me, late afternoon, early evening, open thoughts, and we can kind of gel the open thoughts to maybe another vote if we need to go out and go that far.
This is AR6KU. Yeah, I'd vote for afternoon or something like that, because the evening nets tend to, especially with people home all the time, tend to get in the way of dinner. And cooking dinner and all those kind of things. So I'd vote for sort of mid-afternoon if that works for everybody. But some people are still working, so maybe that's not the best thing either. So.
Well, I don't expect that we're going to be able, as you might imagine, to please everybody. That's why I'm asking for input. But yeah, I appreciate that. I think that probably makes sense because I agree. I think the evening meal followed by what might be regularly scheduled nets for a lot of folks. And by the way, I'm on a different audio device, so if I sound different, I apologize. I think the early evening stuff for HF may be in conflict with some of the regular reoccurring nets. I'm in favor of maybe mid-afternoon as well, or late afternoon. Any other thoughts?
Late afternoon sounds good. Not too, yeah, before 5, but not much before 5, perhaps.
Okay.
How about 4:30?
Let's set a time. I'm okay with 4:30 Wednesday afternoon. I'm usually out of most of my scheduled work by then. I'm still blessed to be working, although that's dynamically a real interesting shift having to try to do it remotely.
I'd go with.
Go ahead.
I'd go with 4:30.
All right.
4:30 is good with me. I'm fine with 4:30.
Yep, 4:30 would work great for me. And then plus I like HF.
Okie dokie. All right, we'll put something together. We'll need to go out and figure out who's going to be net control, things like that, but we'll put something together in the next day or so.
All right, anybody else have any comments, additions, or anything else for this morning?
Yeah, Dave, it's Bob. Just a quick question. For those of us with the ESW cards that have expired, will county HR contact us, or do we have to do something special to go back to them?
We are completely on hold with the renewal process at this time. It was something that was being looked at right before we dipped into the current crisis, and all of that is absolutely on hold.
Okay, thank you.
Unfortunately, as you might imagine.
One more thought for these meetings. It would be useful to have an approximate duration. If it's going to run a couple of hours, that's a different scenario than if it's going to run an hour. So if that would be included in the meeting announcement, that would be helpful.
And I'm thinking that we probably should reserve, this is just my outside voice, we should probably reserve a minimum of an hour and possibly as much as an hour and a half or two for the regularly scheduled meeting. I know we've changed the window from 8 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock, but I think for our regular second Saturday, if you can try to keep the 2-hour window optional, we'll try to get to the meat and potatoes in the first hour. For the opposing Saturday on the 4th, I would think that would be a much shorter meeting duration or window unless something's going on that we need to dig into. How's FT8? No one's going to answer how FT8's doing this morning. Okay, I see how you guys are.
FT8's doing well on 20.
All right.
There's your answer.
Okay, folks. Thanks for being with us. Look for updated information regarding the 4:30 on Wednesday afternoons. We'll figure out, again, band plan where to start, things like that, plus or minus frequencies, depending on what's going on. We'll probably have to wrangle a little bit. As you might imagine, with everybody being home, there are a lot more emergent nets that are happening that are not necessarily things that have been running for years and years and years on the HF bands. There's a lot of pop-up stuff that just started happening because everyone's doing the social distancing by radio thing and just kind of keeping their sanity. So thank you all for being here. Thanks for being flexible in what you're doing. Thanks for being with us in these interesting times. As everybody keeps saying, we will get through this. It's just awkward trying to figure out what exactly it is we're still trying to get through in some cases. Hi. 73. I'll let Dave shut her down.
All right, if nobody has any additional comments or suggestions or anything, we'll go ahead and close the meeting. I see somebody just stuck something in chat. Good luck to all. And as Bruce said, we will get through this. It's just going to take a little more time. Thanks everybody for being here, and we will see everybody on the 11th.
Thank you. Great meeting.
Yeah, sounds good.
7-3.
Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
73.
73.